Welcome to the Me and Money podcast, where your hosts and certified financial planners, Matt Fizell and Elliott Appel, share their thoughts on hot topics, important concepts, and real-life stories in personal finance. Hear from Matt and Elliott as they share lessons learned in their own financial journeys and those they've witnessed throughout their careers while helping clients. Have a question you'd like to hear discussed on a future episode of the podcast? You can reach out to Matt or Elliott or drop your question at the link listed in the show notes. Before we get to the episode, we'd like to remind you that while both Matt and Elliott are financial planners, they are not your financial planner, and this podcast is only intended for educational purposes. For full disclosures, please be sure to listen to the end of the episode or check out the show notes on your favorite podcast platform. Now, on to the show with your hosts, Matt Fizell and Elliott Appel.
Welcome back to another episode of the Me and Money podcast. Elliott, how's it going over there today?
It's going well. How are you doing?
Doing well. It was a nice Labor Day weekend, which, we're recording for like October, so I'm even happier now that we have some buffer on the podcast. But I know before we were chatting today, I told you I was at a wedding, and per usual, anytime, I'm sure you get this too, when you go into a social setting for too long and people ask what you do, they start to ask you some questions. So I thought it'd be fun to tackle one of those today, and maybe I'll just send that episode to the particular guest that was there.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one. I would label this questions in the wild because we do get these questions and sometimes it takes an interesting turn to a different area. But what question did you get there?
Yeah. So the question was, should I manage my own Roth IRA? And what I think this person was more getting at was, should I manage my own investments? I didn't really want to go, down the rabbit hole. I wanted to, not take a half hour to explain that a Roth IRA and traditional IRA and all these things aren't too different from each other. But I think that's really what they were driving at. So I think that's a fun one. I think we see a lot of that on Reddit. We see a lot of it on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, right? I can just go do this my own, like, why do I need to pay you, right?
Yeah.
So I think let's just start with, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. My initial thought is it depends, which is why we spend 30 minutes trying to answer questions when they ask us questions in the wild. But I think a lot of people are capable of managing their own investments. I think it also starts with having an investment policy statement. For me, that's a really important thing, that if you're managing your own funds, and this is something that we do for clients, is we actually outline exactly how we're going to invest, why, what's it for, what sort of investments we're using, at what point we would make changes with it. So actually making a documentation, a living, breathing document that goes with you. So that way, when life happens, when something happens politically, when tariffs are put on, when there's a market decline, when there's a recession, whatever it is, you have this document to go back to, and you're not making knee-jerk reactions to what is going on in the world. So I would start there. What would you say?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great framework. Of course, I want to start poking holes into that because that's what we do here. But
by all means.
No, my first question to them was, how often do you look at your investments? To me, it really helps me understand, like, okay, what is this person trying to accomplish? Are they just trying to accomplish, like, setting themselves up for retirement? This particular person, I think she's in her early 30s, maybe late 20s. So it's like, okay, like, you probably don't need my help, actually. Pointed her to some resources like Personal Finance Reddit, Bogleheads, right?
Yeah.
But the reason why I asked that question, how often do you check it, is I find that there's either just the set it and forget it DIY folk, which for most of your life, I would agree with you, Elliott, it's going to be just fine. If you have low cost investments and you're well diversified, whatever that means to you, right? Could be different than what it means to me, but you're probably going to be okay, and you're probably not going to do too much damage to yourself. But if you are someone who's in there checking it every day, like, that is a different story, in my opinion, because I've tend to see situations where people try to outsmart themselves or the market and end up outsmarting themselves. So that was really my answer. I'm like, are you disciplined? Like, are you going to to panic, right? And make changes, or are you just want to know what to put it into? Like, to me, those are two different questions.
Yeah. And that can be really hard. Like if we're talking late 20s, this person really hasn't seen an extended market decline, right? And if I'm doing my math correctly, you had a quick one during COVID, but absent that, the market's been more or less straight up their entire investing horizon. So it's one of those things where it's tough to know how you're going to answer that question in real life when it actually comes down to it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they remember like high school, because I was, I'm not too far from my late 20s, right? So I definitely remember like 2007, 2008. I understood the headlines, but I didn't really understand what that meant for a lot of people in that time, right? So
yeah.
I would
different when
agree
your
with
own
that.
money's at risk.
Yeah. And I think too, like, this isn't going to turn into, an investment thesis episode, but, outside of like any real downward trend across the market, we have kind of been in this weird period too, where the US hasn't really particularly underperformed. And that's where I see a lot of, we saw it in our own circle last year, right? Like, I should get the international portion out of my portfolios because it sucks. And it's like, well, it does until it doesn't, right? And so, again, we're not going to get too in the weeds here on investment recommendations, but I think that's something where in this internet era that we've been in, like, much of the same has been true for the last, shall we say, 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think that could change, right? Like, I'm not calling a change, but I'd be foolish to not think it could change, right?
I hope you didn't jinx it there, Matt.
Well, say what you will, but
yeah. No,
we don't need to turn this into a political podcast today. But yeah, so I guess like, what would you, because when I heard you say like, if you have an investment policy statement, like that's all fine and dandy, but like when rubber meets the road and these things start to happen, like if you are a DIY investor, is that piece of paper going to stop you from doing something foolish or something that could devastate your finances at this point in the road? Like, again, I doubt she has like millions and millions of dollars in a Roth IRA, but I think you get what I'm saying. Right?
Yeah. And who knows, right? But I think it's one of those things that if you do document it, there's at least a better probability that you stick with it or have something to go back to, as opposed to, I made these random investments at a random time because I was feeling about them how I was at the time. And now I don't know, given everything that just happened in the world, insert whatever just happened, how that's going to respond. Whereas if you do document it, at least there's some thought, there's some process behind it that you can come back to during that time. That's my feeling about that. You don't really know until you go through it, but it's better to make mistakes when you're younger and there's less at risk typically than later in life, is my feeling.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think too, like, as much as we give some of the DIY communities like some well-deserved tough love from time to time, like, I could envision that scenario where these things happen and the communities are like, buy the dip, or, diamond hands, right? Like, not in the stock buying, meme stock buying situation, but, I guess I have a little bit more faith than maybe I did 5 or 10 years ago that those communities will actually step in and say like, no, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the next question, and maybe we can take this somewhere else, sort of becomes, what are the alternatives if you don't want to do it?
Yeah. Obviously like the traditional one, right, is work with someone like ourselves, right? I would say too, though, like even with that, making sure that you're getting true financial planning. And that's something too, where I just think back to a prospect call that I had earlier this year. It was back in February. Like, man, if I could go back and just replay that call for that couple, they wanted to like invest their down payment fund on their house. And they're like, oh, I can just do that in like, the S&P 500 Vanguard fund. Right. And it's like, here's why you probably shouldn't do that. And some of the questions there were more along like, when do you plan on using this? And this is where I'm going with this, but working with someone like you or me, right? Like, those are the type of questions that we're asking. And if you are exploring working with an advisor and they're not asking those kind of questions, I think that's a pretty big red flag. But just make sure you're getting a holistic financial plan or comprehensive, where they're actually asking you about what do you want to do, 6 months to a year from now, like 5 years from now, when do you want to retire? Maybe you're too young to even understand that. But I think that's a really good place to start, or maybe just go find some basic retirement planning questions out there that might help you understand like what you're trying to do with these investments. I guess that's the place I would start. But what about you, Elliott?
No, I think that's a perfect place. And I'm terrible at pitching my book. So I'm going to hold this up and pitch my book right now, because I think that's Money Lessons for Change, what they should have taught you in school. Like resources. That's a great way to learn more about that and how to structure that. That can provide a good foundation. I also think this is where robo-advisors at times can fill a need. And they get a lot of bad press sometimes, but for someone who's purely like, I'll take the other side of this, maybe they're not looking for financial planning or just need a stopgap measure for the investments for this time. It can be a very nice, you answer a few questions. We can debate whether that's right or wrong another time. And money gets put into a pool tailored to those questions. I think that can be a good place. You're going to pay for it. It's probably going to be less than the cost of a financial planner, but more than doing it on your own typically. And so that for me can be a good middle of the road where you don't really have to think about it. It's done for you. I think with some education resources and that, a lot of people could take from the Robo Camp and do a DIY approach. But it can be, if you really truly don't want to think about it, it's not a bad solution in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Otherwise, YouTube's great. Like there's a ton of CFPs out there doing awesome educational content where you can just learn a bit more about this stuff yourself and then decide if it's something you want to do or not. I guess it's not, in my eyes, the best scenario, but I bet most people have banking relationships who may be able to, either give you some resources or maybe they have an advisor on staff who would just be willing to chat with you for a few minutes and like help you chart your course, I guess. And another underrated thing too is a lot of 401k plans have a ton of educational material behind the scenes, like either stuff somewhere on your Fidelity or Vanguard, or maybe you have, a broker who comes around once a year and talks about that stuff with you. Like those are really good places to ask those questions as well. And I'm guessing most people who listen to this have a job or some form of a retirement plan. So, there's always good resources there too.
There are. And I often call that sort of financial planning light. It can get you a basic idea of what to do or where to go, but it's not going to be the same as a full-fledged financial plan from someone who's doing that and getting paid for it. Because oftentimes these people are paid based on what they recommend. And I think that's just important to bring up because these questions happen all the time. Are they a fiduciary? How do they get compensated? All those types of things. Typically, these people have to get you into a product to get paid. So they sort of offer this financial planning light to hopefully sell enough people on these other things to make money. Again, not a bad thing. And I've suggested it for other folks in the past to get a basic idea of where they stand today and a little bit of education. You just have to go in there a little bit wary.
Yeah. And I'll actually link a PDF that I send out to everyone who schedules like an intro call to me. It's just like 10 questions to ask a financial planner. So typically when people reach out to me, they're interviewing myself and a couple of other options. Like, I don't care necessarily if they work with me or not, but I hope that whoever they're interviewing, they're asking the right kind of questions. And I'll include that in the show notes.
Great.
But yeah. So we took the side of like, if you do not want to DIY it, we took the side of if you do want to DIY it, I'm going to propose the third one. Like, other than what I've already said, when should you not DIY it? What are some things that you have maybe seen create issues and it's like, look, you just need to reach out to someone?
My mind, are we still talking about the Roth IRA specifically or other types of accounts?
Let's expand it because I really don't think, I think like in this case, right, that question was, this is what I have.
Sure. Okay.
But I think it was more of a general like DIY type question.
Yeah. So things that I would consider not DIYing it if there's multiple beneficiaries at times. So now we're talking more about some sort of trust that maybe was created at death or something like that. I'm I'm more hesitant to do a DIY approach there because you have multiple beneficiaries, sometimes competing priorities, and it just opens up more risk for you individually on how you're managing that trust. And sometimes that's really nice to outsource to a third party to say, hey, I've worked with them to reach an allocation and how we're going to invest this, but they're really responsible for that. So if there's a mistake or something that the beneficiary doesn't agree with, you sort of have a little more protection and a little bit more removed from the situation. So that's where my mind goes immediately. What about for you?
Yeah, I would say honestly, like any inherited asset. I think it's just, I don't know. I see the posts on Reddit, right? Where it's like, I just inherited this, that, and the other from this relative. And, here's what people are telling me to do with it. And a lot of times, again, I think it really depends on where you are, but a lot of times the general DIY approach is like stick it in a S&P 500 index fund, like, whatever. But especially when we're talking with like inherited IRAs or things like that, right? Like you have to, especially now, most of the case with a lot of these, new rules that came up a few years ago, like there are those annual distributions that you have to take that are a lot bigger than they used to be. And that, if we do see a decline in the market, like that could be a pretty hefty loss that maybe you didn't want to realize, or maybe you do have a use for the money at a specific time, or maybe you really put yourself in a tough tax situation. But that's kind of getting outside of the, I guess, investment lens that we're putting on this. But yeah. I think that's a really interesting one, along with, embedded capital gains, depending on what's going on there or how long that account has been sitting after your relative passed away. Like there can just be some not so great things to deal with. It just gets more complicated.
Yeah, I might expand on that and just say like any sort of sudden money, whether it's an inheritance, lottery winnings, gifts, something like that, where you come into wealth that you historically have not had. And there's emotions. I mean, I've talked previously about getting inheritance for my dad, and it wasn't a life-changing amount of money by any measure, but I really just wanted to be done with it. Like I transferred it almost as quickly as possible my brokerage account, get it in there, invest it, so I didn't have to think about it anymore. So even for someone who works around that, it can be really an emotional subject where you're trying to figure out like, what does this money mean? How do I not mess it up? People come to me often like, hey, I got this money. My parents, whoever, grandparents aren't around anymore. This was my backstop. Mm-hmm. I need to not mess this up. How do I make sure I do that? And so I think that can be helpful in that, I don't want to say state of mind, but it sort of is a state of mind, right? You just lost and you're grieving and going through that. It's hard to then, how do I make this money work for me in the way that it should, while still maybe honoring their wishes? And that sort of depends on the person too.
Yeah. And I think to that point, like, even sometimes when you inherit it, it's like, oh, well, dad used to pick those stocks out of the newspaper, so like I'm not going to sell them. Like, and you could be taking on way too much risk for either yourself in general or for whatever it is you're hoping to use that money for, like,
or too little,
right? Like there's that side of the coin as well. So I think it's just one of those things where I think that's a really good point, Elliott. Like trying to separate, and I think that's what we were talking about at the beginning too, like with the discipline or how often are you checking it, right? Just trying to decouple, right? The emotions and the finances together. Like they can be a really good thing together. They can be a really terrible thing, but if you can just look at them for what each of them are, I think you're much better to not run into issues there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what are some other ones, if any?
That's what comes to mind. What else for you?
I was just going to say, like, if you're, I don't know how to say this delicately, but like, if you're trying to get rich quick, like, I think that's a really bad sign. Like, to me, that's a deeper conversation than what this podcast can entail, but there's some form of like scarcity there. And I think that's where it's really hard to realize when you're in a scarcity mindset. But, I think if you're in that mode, and this is where I really think it's interesting talking to people for so many years about this stuff, like the people who ask me what's the best thing to do with my money, like I don't think it's usually out of a place of wisdom or stewardship. It's like, how do I get to the end as fast as I possibly can with as little work as possible? Yeah. And so if you're viewing this like as a shortcut to something, that's not really, in my opinion, a situation where you want to be doing this yourself.
I agree 100%.
Yeah. Because we just don't know. And, it's one of those things where if any singular person held the crystal ball, like, which some maybe have gotten lucky enough to appear as though they do, like, none of us would share that, right? Like, everyone would take their money and go do it and arbitrage as much as they can for themselves, right? If I had the crystal ball, I don't think I'd be sitting here recording this podcast right now, right? As of recording this, if I held the $1.3 billion Powerball ticket, I probably wouldn't be, sitting here doing this. So I think that's just a really important thing to, I mean, you have to be honest with yourself, right? And that can be really hard. Which
I think that's a tough one to do. I run into so few of those conversations these days. I got it, I think, when I was younger, but I just don't see those anymore, so that doesn't even come to mind. But I agree. Like if you're chasing that, and oftentimes you don't realize you're chasing it, there aren't really shortcuts. People get lucky. That could be maybe a shortcut, but other than that, it's pretty hard.
Yeah. And I think it just goes one more, layer on that. Like, please do not ask ChatGPT for investment advice. Like, I've had one.
That could be a whole new episode, I guess. I've never thought about that.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's really like an academic episode there quite yet with just how new it is, but be wary is all I'll say.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Anything you want to close with, Elliott?
That's it. I would reiterate investment policy statement if you're doing it on your own. There's samples out there. I have one on my website, kindnessfp.com. I think that's a good starting point if you are going to DIY it, and then ask good questions like Matt had talked about. Check out his PDF if you are going to hire somebody. Yeah.
And we'll link your IPS in the show notes as well.
Great.
So, all right. Well, it's good to see you, Elliott. And I think we should do more of this. Maybe we should, head downtown someday. This weekend would have been great with all the people at Taste of Madison, but we should head downtown and ask some questions. Booth. Yeah. Like the meme, right? Where it's like, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Me and Money podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Have a question you'd like to suggest for a future episode? Drop Matt or Elliott a question at their email or use the linked form in the show notes. Like what you heard? It would be a tremendous help to us in our mission of having real conversations about personal finance by leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. A few words can go a long way in connecting those looking for content like ours on their app of choice. You can also support the show by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks again for listening, and be on the lookout for future episodes soon.
The Me and Money podcast is hosted and produced by Harmony Outsourcing Services LLC. Matt Fizell is an investment advisor representative of Harmony Wealth L.L.C. Elliott Appel is an investment advisor representative of Kindness Financial Planning LLC. However, the views and opinions expressed by Matt and Elliott in this podcast are not intended as individualized investment advice on behalf of Harmony or Kindness, or as tax, accounting, or legal advice. Although we gather information from sources that we deem to be reliable, we cannot guarantee the accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of any information prepared by any unaffiliated third party. When specific investments or types of investments are mentioned, such mention is not intended to be a recommendation or endorsement to buy or sell the specific investment. Harmony is a registered investment advisor authorized to do business in the states of Wisconsin and Texas and other jurisdictions where exempted. Kindness is a registered investment advisor authorized to do business in Wisconsin and Washington and in other jurisdictions where exempted. Registration as a registered investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. This website contains links to the Harmony and Kindness websites that provide general information about the advisory services offered by Harmony and Kindness. These links are provided as a convenience only. Harmony and Kindness can only provide individualized services after you sign an agreement and receive required disclosures. Users of this website may, but are not required to, engage the services of Harmony or Kindness for advisory services. Please remember that all investments involve varying degrees of risk, and the future performance of any specific investment or investment strategy is not guaranteed to be profitable or equal to any historical performances. As a final note, we'd encourage you to reach out to your financial professionals before implementing any of the strategies or concepts discussed in this podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.